The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for another one of our live chats. My name is Lakelyn Hogan. I'm gerontologist and caregiver advocate for Home Instead Senior Care. And again, want to thank you so much for joining us for today's Alzheimer's live chat. Our chats are brought to you by the Home Instead Senior Care Network, a network of locally owned franchise offices. Home Instead Senior Care's network offers home care with an individualized approach to help keep your older adult loved ones safe and independent at home. And to learn more, you can visit homeinstead.com. And before we get started in today's chat, we do have a few housekeeping items. First of which, we have a presentation. It looks like we might be having some technical difficulties, so we apologize. But we do, oh, there it is. Here we go. Here's our housekeeping items. So before we get started, I did want to remind everyone that our lines are muted. So if you are going about your day, you can do the dishes, the dog can bark, the doorbell can ring. Don't worry, we can't hear you on our end. It just helps us reduce that background noise. And we are taking questions live here on this chat. So please feel free to type in your questions in the questions box. You'll see that in the right-hand side of your screen. Don't be shy. Type in a question at any time. It's likely that somebody else has a similar question to you. So there's no such thing as a silly question. Please feel free to write those in. All the information that we get from these questions can really be helpful to the entire audience. So again, type in your questions at any time. And finally, we are recording today's live chat, so you don't have to worry about taking notes. We will send out the recording to you via email on the email address you registered with. That way you can share the chat with somebody that might be interested in the topic, or you can go back and listen to it as many times as you would like. And again, we'll send that recorded version out after today's live chat. So I think that's all the housekeeping items I have for us today. So we'll jump into today's topic. Today we are talking about person-centered care, and this is an approach for individuals living with Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. Person-centered care takes into account all aspects of an individual's life that can impact their well-being, not just the disease and the associated symptoms. And this person-centered care approach really considers the person's environment, social connections, beliefs, values, and much more. And we are joined by an expert on this subject today, Molly Carpenter. We're so excited to have her. Molly is the author of Confidence to Care, a resource for family caregivers providing Alzheimer's disease or other dementia care at home. She is also a speaker, trainer, and family caregiver. In her current role at Home Instead, she works with a team responsible for ensuring Home Instead Senior Care's network of over 60,000 caregivers worldwide have resources to the necessary quality care methods in the home and understands the importance of their work enhancing the lives of those they serve. Molly has a master's degree in education with a certificate in gerontology, and she's currently working on her master's in gerontology at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. She has over 15 years of experience working in the field of aging, and we are so excited to have her with us. Molly, welcome.
Thank you, Lakelyn. Thank you so much for having me. I'm grateful to be on the call today and to be with all of you that are listening in and to talk about this subject with all of you.
Well, and Molly, I mean, you and I, we get to share not only our work environment together, but we're also in class together. And we have heard time and time again that this person-centered care is really an approach that's been around for a while, but it's starting to gain more and more traction, wouldn't you say?
I would say so. I think that people are realizing that when it comes to Alzheimer's or dementia, you know, everybody is different in how they progress and what's happening based on the person and their disease process. I think people often say you meet somebody with Alzheimer's, it can be completely unique from somebody else that has Alzheimer's disease. So the person-centered approach is gaining such traction in the field because we have to know as much as we possibly can about the person. That's how we're going to provide the right care or the care that's necessary for that person to still feel involved in life and still have a very good quality of life. So absolutely, it's gaining a lot of momentum.
Yes, and even the Alzheimer's Association just updated their dementia care practice recommendations to tailor them more so to this person-centered care approach. And Molly, you and I, we just attended one of their roundtable discussions of care providers at their International Alzheimer's Association conference back in July. And so you and I, we got to sit around the table with all sorts of care providers. You know, we were there representing the home care industry, but there were memory care facilities, home health care, a variety of providers across the nation. We were all talking about these new dementia care practice recommendations. So I thought, kind of from an educational standpoint, we could talk about these recommendations, and then we can go to questions. Are you good with that?
I think that's great. Let's talk about what this really means, dive into it a little deeper. Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So we got these some great resources from the Alzheimer's Association at this roundtable, and one of the pieces that I thought was really powerful and speaks so directly to this person-centered care approach was a guide on the person living with dementia, their perspective on how they would like to receive person-centered care. And there was about, I would say, almost 10 recommendations. So I'm going to kind of read off each one, and then maybe we can talk about them as we kind of go through the list. So the first was to get to know the person. So why do you think that I know you've already mentioned it a little bit, but why do you think that that is so important in the care that's provided?
I think the why this is, the foundation of it all is, as the disease progresses and the brain continues to fail, the person themselves with Alzheimer's or dementia, they are forgetting everything from the people's names to their routine to what a fork is for. I mean, they're not, with the brain continuing to fail and progress and fail, what happens is they don't really know how to live their life anymore. They can't remember every step of what to do. And so when we know the person, we can help fill in the blanks and the gaps, and we can help be there to support and to offer those little hints, or kind of direct to the next routine that the person's used to, or direct them or redirect them to their favorite tea in the afternoon, whatever that may be. But we have to know about that person so that we can help them stay relevant and stay contributing to this life that they have for as many years as possible. So getting to know them is obviously the most important step. And the great thing is that I love about this is that it's really, as a family caregiver or even a really good friend to the person that has dementia, you already know so much about the person. You've got a huge advantage. Wouldn't you say, Lakelyn?
Oh, most certainly. Yeah,
so
I mean,
sort of like, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and these people who are family caregivers who are providing care have likely lived with this person for years and years, or grew up, watching them engage in certain hobbies or activities, or they know what kind of music they like, or the favorite foods that bring them comfort. So a lot of times family caregivers don't realize that they have those tools right at their fingertips, and they can help the care provider, whether that's they're having home care come in or if their loved one has to move to a facility, they can use that knowledge of the person and communicate that to the staff at the agency or the facility to help them also better care for their loved one.
And I think you made the point exactly that there's nothing new to really learn here. That's the great thing. You don't have to go take a class and learn how to do all these different things. You have the information you need to do this, to be a caregiver, and to do all of the daily tasks and everything that you need to do very well. And the other great news is that I think sometimes family caregivers and friends of these people that have Alzheimer's disease, I don't think they realize that they have all this at their fingertips, and that they don't think about using memories or routines from the past or likes and dislikes as part of the care process or part of how to provide good care. You know, I don't think they realize that all of the information is right there at their fingertips to do this. So that's why I'm just so excited about this topic. I get a little jazzed up about it because it's just it's absolutely wonderful tool to help families.
I agree. Couldn't agree more. Well, the next kind of key takeaway from a person living with dementia, they said, help me maximize my independence. So, Molly, can you maybe help explain how family members could help maximize the independence of their loved one with dementia?
Right. I think that's, again, I think a lot of times when a person has any kind of disease or any kind of ailment, any kind of issue, we sort of there could be this tendency that they can't do what they used to do, or they're not the same person, or they can't live that great of a life anymore. Well, the opposite is true here when we're talking about maximizing independence. Just because somebody has their brain is failing, they have Alzheimer's or dementia, does not mean they cannot still be an active participant in their life for quite a while. So maximizing independence is all about, you know, keeping familiar routines. I kind of think of it as almost a proactive touch in the background where a family caregiver may, you know, either gently remind somebody that, okay, today's the day that you usually go do this, or that we do this activity, whether it's take a walk or meet the guys for breakfast or whatever it might be. So we're doing those little cues in the background, those little reminders in the beginning, and trying to really help them maintain their independence, maintain their routine as much as possible. Maybe it's setting up calendars or putting notes on a refrigerator, whatever it is. The person, we all know how we feel when somebody does something for us. We're usually very thankful and touched, but at the same time, we sometimes are like, gosh, I could do it myself. I don't need the help, or I'm strong enough to do this on my own. That doesn't go away even when you have Alzheimer's. So that's why, you know, maximizing independence, letting the person do as much as they still possibly can with maybe a little bit of reinforcement in the background, that is the key here with maximizing their independence.
Well, you made so many good points, and just one more to add to that, I would say sometimes in the instance of maybe activities of daily living, so that's personal care activities, bathing, grooming, routines, sometimes when you get to a certain stage in Alzheimer's or dementia, you might still know how to do the activity, but you might just need a little prompting. So sometimes it's helpful for families to break things down into small steps, or kind of show them, you know, this is how I'm brushing my teeth, and it'll give them visual cues. So even as the person progresses through the disease, families can really still help that person maximize their independence by just breaking down activities into smaller, more manageable steps and those sorts of things. So I agree with all that you said, and it is really powerful for a person living with dementia who's maybe feels like they're losing so much of their independence, they're losing their memory, some of their abilities. So helping them hang on to whatever it is they can still do can really just be so powerful.
I think that's a great point. And I love your tip about breaking it up into smaller steps or little cues along the way, you know, shorter cues along the way. I think a tendency sometimes for all of us is to just do for the person. It's quicker, it'll be right, it'll be how they want it done, but that's where we have to resist and sort of really kind of ground this whole idea of independence and keeping the person as independent as long as possible. As we have to resist some of those urges. So that's by breaking it down into smaller steps is a great way to do that, where we can still be helpful and still get the task done, whatever it might be, but as well as maintaining, maximizing their independence.
Absolutely, and you actually just teed us up right for the next kind of recommendation from a person living with dementia on how to best kind of carry out this person-centered care. The next one is patience, practice patience and compassion. So as
Yes.
family caregivers, sometimes we have kind of our own agenda, wanting, like you mentioned, to just kind of get it done quickly. So I'm just going to do it for you instead of taking that extra 5 minutes to let you do it yourself. And the person living with dementia is saying, please be patient with me. Please have compassion for what I'm going through. So that was the next one on our list.
I think so. I think the other thing too that we have to remember, and this sometimes helps us to think about it this way, is they know, they can sense, just like you and I that don't have dementia or Alzheimer's, we can sense when somebody is not being patient with us for whatever reason. Either they're fidgeting, or they're talking faster, or they're distracted and looking around, whatever it might be. We can pick up on those cues and know when somebody doesn't have patience for us. So can the person with Alzheimer's, no matter how well we think we're describing, hiding it. It still is, it's going to be a factor. They're going to feel that, which sometimes then can lead to the frustration and the anxiety, whatever it is. I think one of the themes you'll hear me say quite often is how we feel, what we're doing, how we're acting, the words we're using, our body language, all of those things impact the person that we're caring for in any situation, but especially Alzheimer's disease. So again, practicing patience and compassion goes a much longer way than just thinking about, that whole back to maximizing independence. I mean, again, we said it would be so much easier for us to just do it, but at the same time, when we have the patience and we let the person do it, it's going to go a lot longer way.
Absolutely. And the next one is personalize the care to meet the individual's needs and preferences. And we kind of touched on this quite a bit already.
Sure.
But, and again, if you're just kind of tuning in, we're talking about the Alzheimer's Association's recent dementia care practice recommendations. And they actually kind of took a dual approach, one for care providers, and then they also have a kind of a version coming from the people living with dementia. They went out and asked, what does person-centered care mean to you? So we're kind of walking through all of those points from the view of someone living with dementia. So this next one is personalize the care to meet individual needs and preferences, which kind of speaks for itself. Do you have anything else to add to that one, Molly?
No, I think that you're right. It speaks for itself. It's very basic, common, I think common that we all have certain preferences, and we'd appreciate if those preferences were honored as we're caring for. It's sort of like if you and I want a Diet Coke and somebody brings us a Coke, and no, we'd rather have a Diet Coke. It's as simple as that. So absolutely, that one speaks for itself, is really making sure we're understanding what their preferences are and trying to keep those throughout the care experience.
Great. And then the next one is adjust care approaches to reflect day-to-day needs and abilities. And we've kind of talked about briefly about how someone with Alzheimer's, they might have a good day, they might have a bad day. So we really needed to kind of take inventory of, how they're doing that day, and then kind of modify our approach, or it might even change kind of minute to minute depending on the situation. So any other thoughts on that point there, Molly?
No, I think that's a great point, that we have to monitor the day and what's happening and the mood and how did the person sleep. I mean, there's all of those factors. But I think the other thing is we're going to have to be cognizant of things over time. So yes, day to day, but even over time, I think watching somebody progress with Alzheimer's disease might be one of the most, if not the most painful journeys that a person can potentially have. And I feel like it's hard to see the decline on a regular basis, but that's the job of the caregiver, is to sort of, as things are changing, because that's what's happening. It's a constant state of change. And as things are changing, we've got to be adjusting as we go. So I have a quick story of a family caregiver who would read a couple of articles to their spouse, to their wife every day from the newspaper, and then they would talk about the article, and then they would go to the next one. So they just did a couple of fun things every day in the newspaper. And as the disease progressed, the family caregiver, the husband, was getting more and more frustrated because the wife could no longer sort of engage in the conversation. And he got to the point where he was mad and sort of, what do you mean you don't know? How could you not answer? How do you not understand? Got so frustrated. So again, this was an example where we kind of explained to the family caregiver, listen, his name was George. Listen, George, her brain is failing even more now, so she's not going to be able to respond. But that doesn't mean you should stop reading the paper every day to her, because that's what she's used to doing. You just have to tailor your own expectations. So again, it's just important over time to sort of be watching and understanding as things are changing and making those adjustments.
That's a great story that illustrates this point, I think, so kind of perfectly. Is not only does the caregiver need to adjust to the day-to-day abilities, but the caregiver themselves kind of needs to check in with their mindset, check in with their approach to the caregiving situation too, because we know that it can be hard to accept that the changes are happening, and people can find themselves wishing their loved one could still do things like converse about the current events in the world. But unfortunately, this disease robs people of their ability, of their different abilities throughout the progression. So family caregivers kind of need to adjust day to day as well in terms of their expectations.
That's a great point. That's a great
point
you for sharing about expectations. Yes.
So then we have three more. So the next is provide ongoing opportunities for engagement that have meaning and purpose. And I'm just going to comment just how important quickly that meaning and purpose part is, because there's all sorts of activities we could do for our loved ones. But Molly, why is it so important that we try to engage them in meaningful and purposeful activities?
Well, I think again, it goes back to sort of that whole maximizing independence and preserving dignity. It's all about relevancy, and you want the person to still be able to contribute to the situation that they're in, or the society that's around them at that moment. So it's hard when, not to say that people don't like to try new things, but I go back to one of my examples of somebody, and this was in a memory care unit situation where it was a cooking class. It was a cooking demonstration where a resident was making, who had dementia and Alzheimer's, was making her famous lemon bread. And there was a gentleman sitting there, and the staff kept trying to get him to partake in it. Well, he never cooked or baked anything in his entire life. And so this opportunity for engagement was not for him. It just wasn't something he was interested in. Now, when it was time to sit and have a piece of the cake and some milk and share stories, he was in, because that's what he did. And so then he found a lot of purpose in this activity. But I just think we have to think about that throughout the day of, and is this meaningful? Is this purposeful? Would the person have normally done this? And, you can stretch that. I don't want to say you can't, just because somebody never baked before, maybe they would like to do it. So, I mean, it's worth a try occasionally, but at the same time, you want to be very careful about providing engagement opportunities that are very meaningful and purposeful to the person. So that's where, again, knowing the person, that's the whole point of person-centered care. You have it at your fingertips. You know what the person would think is meaningful and purposeful, and you know what's important to them. So providing these opportunities is you have that ability. It's there.
Yeah, and I think people sometimes, or family members, might think, oh, I have to have all sorts of arts and crafts and activities. And
yes.
And we do find that people with dementia tend to use art as therapy, even if maybe they never were an artist. But at the same time, I think families might fail to recognize that even those activities of daily living, you can kind of make those as opportunities for them to engage in the process. Or I heard a story of a woman that she was living in a care facility setting, and she would always come into the dining room when the staff was setting up for the meal, and she would start kind of moving things on the table. And the staff would get so frustrated and escort her out, and 5 minutes later she'd be back in. And they realized that, she was a hostess. She loved to throw parties. She loved to set a pretty table for her guests. And so they realized, wow, she wants to help us. So then they found an activity where she could roll the silverware in the napkins, and it not entertained her, but it was a meaningful activity for her for a good hour of every day. So even just opportunities such as that, that might not seem like an activity or an opportunity for meaningful engagement can be meaningful to that individual. And again, that all goes back to the person-centered care and knowing that person, and that family kind of did, stepped up and said, hey, these are things that my loved one has enjoyed their whole life. It might be meaningful activities for her to engage in. So I always think that that's a cute story that I like to share.
Yep, absolutely. It's very relevant.
And then the next one is kind of along those lines, ensure coordination among those who provide care. So this person-centered care approach can be great, but if it's only being carried out by one person in the care team, it might not be that effective. So Molly, could you speak a little bit to the importance of ensuring communication among those who provide care? And then we maybe talk about who might all be involved in that kind of coordination of care, or that care circle.
Sure. I think, who might all be involved? It could be a lot of different people. And I think the word care, sometimes people think, oh, they're the ones, helping them get dressed. No, care could be the neighbor that comes over every Wednesday from 10 to 12 to help in the garden while the family caregiver is out to the grocery store. Or a person could be running to the neighbor could be running to the grocery store and coming to the home and bringing groceries. I mean, people that are in this person's life really is the way I look at who could be on this team. And yes, there's different medical professionals. There might be different medical or non-medical needs where outside resources are needed. But I think the point of this one is really about ensuring that everybody kind of understands the situation, and that everybody knows what's happening at that time, because again, we've talked about the changes, and then really being able to, again, we know how we feel when we meet somebody new or somebody that we don't recognize. It's awkward at the beginning. Well, when everybody understands the situation, everybody knows what they're walking into, that whole awkwardness could be gone. So really, when we're talking about coordinating, it's really so that the person that's at the center of this, the person with the disease, is feeling calm and safe and secure and supported throughout the situation, whatever they may be in. So really, the coordination is around making sure everybody understands the needs, the wants. And again, this is where a lot of those likes and dislikes come into play. That sometimes people are very particular even about a greeting. So we don't call you Lakelyn, we call you Mrs. Hogan, or we have to be those kind of things. So I think the coordination around it is just making sure that the person, again, is feeling very safe in whatever situation they're in.
And that's actually the last point that we took, that the dementia care practices recommend, is to create a safe and supportive environment that reflects the person's characteristics, personality, and preferences. So that really just kind of sums up everything that we've been talking about. But Molly, is there, let's say I'm a family caregiver and I really want to kind of implement this person-centered care, but I just don't know how to go about it. Are there any tools, or I think of maybe keeping a journal or something? How do I communicate to everyone involved in the care, this is my loved one's preferences, and so forth? Do you have any suggestions on that?
I think a journal is, usually the way people go. And it doesn't have to be a fancy journal. It could be a notebook or whatever. It could be index cards. I had a family once who had index cards, and they had, here's the 5 most important things you need to know about my mom. And it was things from that she's always cold, so make sure she has a sweater with her, to things like I forget what one of them, it was something about the way you greeted her, and it wasn't words, it was the approach, like don't approach her from behind, or it was something like that. So I thought that was incredibly important, and they felt like if everybody knew these 5 things about their mom, that the situation would be fine. Like they would either start off on the right foot or stay on the right foot throughout the interaction with whoever they were talking to. So I do think it takes a little bit of a communication. I've seen families start like email strings. I've seen families have kind of private Facebook pages, or any kind of those text strings where people are like, oh, texting each other, here's what happened today, and sort of remember this when you're going next time about mom or dad or whatever's happening. So I think there's lots of different ways families have gotten really creative, but the power of that communication and the coordination between all the care providers is really important. And again, it is all about safety, really, when it comes making sure that person feels safe in the situation that they're in.
Those are all great suggestions, Molly. And I know that there are some apps even out there that can help caregivers facilitate communication. And I know I'm not overly familiar with all of them, but that might be a tool that your family could use too, or Google Docs, Google Calendars. I've seen families kind of utilize that too. So there's lots of tools out there. And sometimes just the old-fashioned pen and paper can be a great way to kind of log the activity as well. So thank you for those suggestions. So we've kind of summed up these dementia care practice recommendations that the Alzheimer's Association has put out. And in a little bit, we'll share our resource slide with you, and we'll reference where you can go and download those to learn more if you're interested. But now that we have a good understanding of what person-centered care is, I thought we would open it up for some questions. So if you're listening, please feel free to type in some questions. We do have some questions that have been coming in. And we're going to start with this question from Mike. Mike says, my grandmother was diagnosed with dementia. She was regressing memory-wise about 20 years at one point and forgetting names. So Mike's wondering, what is the best response when a person forgets a name or thinks they're living in the past? Molly, any thoughts on that?
Yes, great question, Mike. And I think we get this question quite often because it's difficult. Our nature is to correct and to say, don't you remember their name? It's just human nature. So that's nobody's fault. It just comes out. It's the first thing our brain thinks of. But I think the best response, Mike, is to really consider living in the moment. So even though she's 20 years ago, or in the time period of 20 years ago, or wherever she's at, really living in her moment, being in her world. And this is again where person-centered concepts are so important, because as a family member, Mike, grandson, you probably know what she's talking about. And maybe are pretty familiar, or maybe not, but somewhat familiar with what was happening 20 years ago. And you probably know the names that she has forgotten. So I think one of the things around this disease is really helping to maintain dignity. And so obviously it's, again, our first nature is to say, Mom, that's, Lakelyn, or that's Molly. Of course you know Molly, or of course you know Lakelyn, whatever it might be. But what I find it a little bit easier, or a habit to kind of get into, is to start to say the person's name before, even if you see that confused look on her face. So, things like when she's first interacting with somebody that maybe you can see that confusion starting to come, you can say, you turn to the person and use their name so that she can hear you use their name. Kind of some of those cues like that, or casually just mentioning, look at Lakelyn over there. Doesn't she look nice today? Just any sort of way to sort of get that name in her head without her having to have this panic moment of, oh my gosh, I can't remember the person's name, so to speak.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add there, Lakelyn?
Well, yeah, and I've heard family caregivers who automatically just, whether they call or they show up in person, they always say, "Hi, Mom, it's Lakelyn," so that they don't have to sit and try to remember. My mom has 3 daughters, so if it was her, my mom doesn't have dementia, but I'm just thinking my family situation. She might be thinking, "Oh gosh, is that Jackie, Mikkel, or Lakelyn? I'm not sure." So just by kind of helping from the get-go with name recognition can be really helpful. And sometimes, I heard a story of a woman who she would go to the memory care unit and her mom wouldn't remember her, and she was really sad about it. But then she was talking to the staff, and the staff was saying that she, when her daughter wasn't there, was always talking about her daughter and how she always came home with A pluses on her report card. And so this daughter went through all of her boxes of stuff, from her childhood, and was able to find a picture of her when she was little in one of her old report cards and started taking that with her on visits. And her mom would talk to her daughter about how much she loved her daughter, and she remembered her as a little girl at that point. But it was still so meaningful for that daughter to, while her mom couldn't recognize her in present day, still talked so fondly of her, at her childhood. So I think family members can maybe even use, photos from the past to talk about family, even if they can't remember, the exact names of people too. So I think those were all good suggestions.
I think also that I would like to tell Mike is, I think when somebody's bringing up a memory from the past or talking about something that happened 20 years ago, first, that's a strong memory, or it's something they're wanting to talk about for whatever reason. And so there's a movement, or there's been quite a bit of a movement for the last 20 years about validating people where they are. And so, Mike, think about the next time she brings up some memory that was 20 years ago, instead of saying or whatever, I don't know how you're handling it, so I don't want to put any words into your mouth, but saying things like, wow, that sounds like it was a great time, or sounds like you were feeling happy, tell me more about this, or geez, Grandma, that sounds like a hard time in your life. How did you get through it? Just sort of validating where she's at, no matter what it is, no matter, if it was 20 years ago, but she's really feeling pretty strongly about whatever it is she's thinking about. So sort of validating what she might be experiencing in that moment would be pretty powerful. And you'll be surprised what you learn as you keep the memory going, as you keep kind of, validating her feelings and letting her continue. You might actually learn some new things about your family that you didn't know. I did, as I went through it in the end with my grandmother when her dementia progressed. So it was very fascinating, actually.
Well, thank you, Molly, for those tips and those stories that you shared. We do have somebody who just wrote in a question. If you're listening and if you have a question, it doesn't necessarily have to be just about the person-centered care model, but all sorts of questions that are dementia-related, please feel free to write them in. But Jennifer wrote in and she said, if you cannot be with the person in question full-time, at what point do you say it's time to get additional help? What are the triggers? So it sounds maybe like Jennifer, maybe this individual is living on their own, or maybe she's just not able to be there full time. What are some signs she can be looking out for when maybe she should hire some additional help to help the individual with dementia?
Well, I think, first of all, I think that it's the thing with this, Jennifer, is that there's nothing standard that says, oh, now it's time. That's the hard part. But the good part is that there just are some pretty, there's quite a few different symptoms or quite a few triggers that, can enable you to think, oh, it's time or not time. And I guess we have to definitely leave that up to you. But things like, do you think, like, if she's still driving, is there any concern, like has she ever mentioned or he has ever gotten lost, or is there any new dings on the car? Is everything secure in the bank account? Meaning there's not weird checks leaving or credit cards aren't getting charged, anything like that. Any concerns about spoiled food in the refrigerator? Anything about, I guess, not even just memory things, but, is she able to work or he work the appliances that they're used to using? So are they able to still use the microwave or the washer or the stove, whatever it might be? Are there any concerns around about that? And I think that unfortunately this is a pretty big judgment call for you. I think involving a physician, if you need to, would be helpful. There are some at the Medicare wellness exam, if your loved one is on Medicare, they do have a memory screening that is free, and it's in every yearly wellness exam, or your doctor, primary care physician, or whoever does have access to those kind of assessments, and they're really easy and quick, and that can kind of give you a judgment on like where they're at in the current state, and then as you reassess that on a regular basis, or maybe in 6 months or 3 months, and it goes down, maybe that's your cue. Lakelyn, what else would you say to add here with this question? I know you've got some experience with this as well.
Yeah. Well, what I would say to Jennifer is so often we see caregivers reaching out for help almost too late. So I guess my best advice for family caregivers is to start introducing different people into the person's life early on. And it can be, maybe it's having a friend come over to visit, or a family member is taking turns going over for dinner a few nights a week. Or maybe it is having someone, like Home Instead, come in once a week to help with a few things around the house so that they get familiar with having a care provider or someone else in the family beyond just you, Jennifer, coming in to check on them. That does two things. First, it gets another set of eyes and ears on the individual that can give you some feedback. So, if the neighbor is stopping by every week and she's noticing, it looks like she's having confusion with her medication. There's a lot of pill bottles on the table, or, I've noticed a lot of spoiled food in the refrigerator. That's just, again, another set of eyes and ears in the home. If it's a home care agency, they might be able, they're trained professionals, so they're trained to look for those types of kind of warning signs or red flags and communicate that to their employer, who can then, keep the family in the loop. And so as the person progresses through the disease and their needs grow, you can start to kind of fill in more of the care schedule. And as you do, the person will be used to having somebody in the home. And will be hopefully more receptive to having care because they're more used to it. So I would say, even if you're the least bit concerned, Jennifer, that your mom might need some extra help, it might be good to just start with maybe 1 or 2 visits a week from a family member, friend, professional, and then be able to kind of, again, build as her needs build, and give her that comfort level with having some outside help at home. So that's what I would add. Molly, did you think of anything else?
No, I think that's a great add, about especially just from the aspect of having another set of eyes on the situation. And I just think that there are, your mom the best, and if you see things that she's normally completely on top of that are slipping, those are your triggers to think about, again, involving other people, involving potentially a home care kind of a situation. So I think that's a great add to that, Lakelyn, is really that extra set of eyes. And, just to help understand the situation a little bit better, as well as get them familiar for future needs. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we hope, Jennifer, that was helpful in answering your question. And we do have some time left, so if you have a burning question, please feel free to type it in now so we'll have time to get to your questions by the end of the hour. But we did have one come in from Rita. Rita says, my mother has Alzheimer's, and I was wondering what other people do about all of the questions. By noon, I want to go outside and scream. I can only answer the same question so many times without feeling like I'm going to lose my mind. Any suggestions? I hear questions like this so often. So Molly, any thoughts on that?
Yes, Rita, thank you for writing that in and telling us, asking us this question, because I do, like Lakelyn said, we know this is one of the biggest challenges that we hear. And I must start with addressing you first. And I think that it's super important that you find ways to cope. And so if you have to go outside and scream for a minute, just do it. I mean, do what you got to do to get through the situation. But I have read a couple of different studies about deep breaths. And so I want you to practice. I want you to take 5 deep breaths in a row and take about, 3 minutes or so to do it. Don't just do them really quick. And I think you'll be pretty surprised that your cortisol levels, which is your stress hormone, everything's going to go down a little bit and you're going to feel a little bit better. But you do have to figure out ways to cope with your stress and frustration, because as we said earlier, that person feels it too. Even if you're hiding it well, even if you're just, whatever you're doing, the feeling, the vibe you're giving off will lead to, it might even lead to her asking even more questions. The thing about your mother, she loves you so much and she wants to help you. And if she can feel your frustration, maybe not see it, but feel it, she's going to keep trying to ask questions to figure out how she can help you. And they may not be relevant questions because her brain is failing, but just know that situation could present itself. So, but let's talk a little bit more about what techniques you can use to handle some of these questions. And I think, again, big advantage of being person-centered care, being the daughter, you do know a lot, but you're going to have to be a little bit of a detective here. So think about, are there patterns to the questions? Are they the same topic? Are they related to a certain time of day or a certain action? And I think you might need to write it down a couple days in a row, or maybe just 2 days to figure it out. But once you figure that pattern out, it can really help you either redirect her when it starts or be proactive and prevent it. So some examples that I've kind of seen in some of my experiences, and we kind of talked about it earlier, is sort of that normal routine thing or their occupation. Lakelyn told the story about a hostess, a person who used to be a hostess. And so when she saw a table being set up, she wanted to jump in and help, right? So think about a housewife. If your mother was a housewife, for example, I'm sure she did tons of house stuff for you, even if she had an outside career, but she probably had a pretty set schedule. And so if her normal routine was to do laundry on Saturday mornings, and it's Saturday morning and she starts asking you a bunch of questions, and maybe it's not even related to the laundry, but she starts to get that anxiety and asking questions, you might remember, oh my gosh, every Saturday morning she washed our bedding and hung the sheets out on the clothesline. And that may be what she's anxious about. So you either proactively prepare for that and say, Mom, time to go down and start the laundry, and you have her help you, or you you do whatever you can to help her just realize that this is the routine that was happening. Or you start talking about laundry and you say things like, Mom, you made the best. Our sheets smelled so fresh. Whatever detergent you used, it was absolutely the best. And you sort of talk about the routine. I mean, that's just one example of how you can take, sort of understand what the questions are if it's during your routine or a specific action. I think the routine that a person is in is I can't stress how important it is enough. So a lot of times that's what that's around. There's anxiety about they're anticipating an event. They're anticipating, they're very confused. Like they don't, again, with a brain failing, they don't really know what's happening in that moment. And they're used to doing something. They're not used to just whatever sitting there or they're not used to life coming at them. They're used to going out and doing life, doing their life. So it's sort of a mind shift that you have to take of, okay, what can I learn? What do I know about this person or their routine and their likes and dislikes that I can head off these questions? Lakelyn, what else do you have to add to this one? Because we hear this one a lot.
We do. I think you covered a lot of great points, trying to track maybe a pattern, or if you know that, they always ask what time is lunch, make sure that you're reassuring them. Oh, lunch will be in an hour, but first we need to do this. Maybe that will help kind of reduce the number of times they ask. But I loved your breathing exercise. So often even doing that breathing exercise in front of the person with dementia or Alzheimer's, sometimes that visual cue of you taking a breath causes them to take a breath too, and both of you can kind of relax in that moment, in that situation. So I think that there are so many tips and advice, and I know we have a great app. I think now I'll flip to the resource slide just so I can reference some of these, but we have an app on helpforalzheimersfamilies.com that you can download for free, and on that app, you can type in like repetitive questions, like those keywords, and all these tips and advice will pop up. So that first website, the helpforalzheimersfamilies.com, go there. You can download the app. You can also just search for it. It's called the Daily Companion app for Alzheimer's in your app store. So there's even more great tips out there on that. So I hope that Rita walks away from this with a couple tips that maybe she can try. And, also sometimes what works today or tomorrow might not work next week. So sometimes it is a little bit of an investigative process on the end of the family caregiver to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't.
Absolutely. Good tip on that app. There's a lot of good resources there as well.
Yes, absolutely. I bring up that app and show it to people all the time because there's just so much great knowledge on there, and caregivers can share their advice and tips, what's worked for them as well on the app too. So I think that's part of the beauty of it. But we did have somebody just write in. It's kind of a scenario and a question. Danielle wrote in to say, my grandmother has Alzheimer's. My sister and I stayed the night with her while my grandfather was in the hospital. She went to bed and then woke up every hour, very confused that Grandpa wasn't there. She became angry and we realized at that time how advanced her disease really was. It was difficult to see her that way, and I'm fearful of a client reacting in the same way. And what is the best way to handle this type of situation when they are very confused, angry, and it feels like they are a totally different person? So maybe perhaps Danielle works kind of in a care community or for an agency, and she's had this personal experience with her grandma waking up in the night, being confused, upset, and she's wondering what are some ways that she can handle that if it happens again with maybe her grandmother or happens with someone that she works with. And I would say, first of all, Danielle, you're not alone in this situation. We get questions a lot about sleep disturbances for people with dementia, those types of things. It's not uncommon for them to wake up in the middle of the night and be confused. So Danielle, know that you're not alone in that experience. But Molly, do you have any initial thoughts for Danielle on maybe how she could handle that if it ever happened again?
Yes. I think this is an example of what happened was Grandma was feeling very not safe, where's this guy who slept next to me my whole life? Why isn't he here tonight? And I think that is what we can consider why she was so, upset and fearful and all of those things. Unfortunately, there's this, with being a caregiver, there's a lot of trial and error here, right? But the good news is as a granddaughter, a lot about your grandmother. But if that situation arises, obviously I know you probably tried very hard to calm her down and to reassure her that everything was okay, but it might have even been where you slept next to her and you maybe rubbed her back a little bit while she fell asleep. Or does she have sort of a nighttime routine? You may have to go through the nighttime routine again and what, like I'm picturing warm milk or certain activities that the person always does, maybe sort of to sort of emulate that, yes, we're going to bed and that it's nighttime and that we have to, this is the time of the day it is. I've had family caregivers try that before. But I think anything, I just knowing myself with my grandmother, I think I would have jumped into bed with her. That would have been my first reaction of, at least there'll be a body next to her. It won't be her husband that she's looking for, but even if I hold her hand or rub her back or whatever it might be, kind of reassuring her if she does wake up again, that would have been where I'd start. Now that might not work, and she might say, "Get the heck out! I want my husband in my bed." You know, there's all kinds of things, but this is where again that whole trial by error. But knowing your grandmother, how you do. You know, with my grandmother, another thing, see, this is why person-centered care is so important. When we were little kids and I would stay at her house, we would play the ABC game where we would have to say the name, like she'd say, okay, animals is the category tonight. And we'd have to name animals that started with each of the letters of the alphabet. And of course, you guys could figure out we fell asleep by the time we got to whatever letter. That was her trick. So if this were my grandmother and I might even try that again. I might say, let's play the alphabet game. Or, you know, so that it's again, really getting creative, thinking outside of the box. You know this person very intimately well. What do you think she needs at this moment to feel safe and secured? Because some words aren't going to really help a whole lot in the situation, or they're going to help temporarily. Where grandpa's okay, he's just away tonight. He'll be back tomorrow, whatever you guys said to her to reassure her, but that might not go so far. So that's where you got to get a little creative and really know the person.
Absolutely, Molly. I think you made so many good points there. And if you are, you know, there's a lot of information out there on sleep and dementia. So I know the Alzheimer's Association, Danielle, has some great information out on their site. If you just go to their website, alz.org, I have that on the resource slide here, and just type in sleep, there'll be lots of great tips that come up. I know that if you're working maybe with a regular client, or if you're a family caregiver caring for a loved one, there are some things that you can do throughout the day. One of those is creating, you know, kind of a bedtime routine, you know, reducing the amount of naps, or you can adjust the lighting in the house at certain times of the evening to really help to get them to hopefully sleep for longer periods at night. So I think all of Molly's suggestions were great, using the redirection, and you'll know if the client would be receptive to even sometimes like a little white lie, which I know sometimes is controversial in the dementia space, but in this case, you know, grandpa will be back in the morning. We don't know that for sure, but, you know, it might just reassure her in that moment and she can fall back asleep. So you kind of have to know the individual, know if they would be receptive to those kinds of comments. But I think that Molly gave some great tips, and then I would encourage you to go out and do just a little bit of research on the Alzheimer's Association's website, because they do have some great info out there. And unfortunately, we are rounding out the hour here, so I just want to quickly touch on some more resources. If you aren't already a follower of our Facebook page, there are some great articles we post there. There's some great engagement, comments shared back and forth. So our Facebook page is called Remember for Alzheimer's. If you want to read Molly's book, Confidence to Care, there's a website there you can go to learn more. We also have caregiverstress.com, which is some general caregiving information and how to reduce your stress level as a caregiver. If you want to try out home care for your loved one to see if that will be helpful, please visit homeinstead.com. We have some great information and resources there for you. And then I have mentioned the Alzheimer's Association's website there, alz.org. And then if your loved one is having issues with wandering, there is a great resource called the Missing Senior Network, where you can register your loved one. And then if they do happen to wander, the website gives you the opportunity to just send out a quick message via email, text, to everyone in kind of the care circle that can help locate that missing individual. So all those websites on here are great. Our helpforalzheimersfamilies.com site, you can register for our email list. We have a great email this week about the guilt that caregivers feel. We asked our caregiving community, how do you deal with the guilt as a caregiver? Because we hear that so often, and we had a flood of awesome responses. So if you want, kind of regular uplifting tips, that sort of thing, please join our email list, and you can do that at helpforalzheimersfamilies.com. And then next month, we are going to, we usually talk about caregiving, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the caregiver and specifically brain tips, or talk about the women's brain health. We have Lynn Poslins from the Women's Brain Health Initiative. She'll be joining us, and she'll be talking about how everyone, both male and females, can take better care of their brains. And as family caregivers, we often put our own needs last, but there's so much we can do, even little changes in our daily routine that can help preserve our brain health as we continue to care for our loved ones and we continue to age. And you can really start that at any age. So please register for the next live chat. Share it with your family and friends that you think might be interested. So with that, I just want to thank Molly one more time. Molly, thank you so much for joining us. I always enjoy our chats together, sharing resources with the family caregivers who are working so hard to provide the best care possible, person-centered care for their family members and loved ones.
Yes. Thank you, Lakelyn, for having me, and thank you, all of you who are out there caring for your loved ones. It's such a noble thing to do, and it's such a tough role, and we are very grateful you're doing your role, and wish you all very much success in the future in this role.
Thanks, Molly. And again, thanks to all of you. We hope to see you back on our live chat on September 20th. We are trying a new kind of webinar platform, so it might look a little different. We hope that you'll like it. And we are crossing our fingers that there will not be any technical difficulties. So anyway, we look forward to seeing you on September 20th. It'll be at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or noon Central Time. So talk to you then. In the meantime, have a wonderful rest of your day. And be kind to yourself. Take care.